Alright. Welcome back, everybody. This is a special episode this isn't something I do really hardly at all. It takes a lot of work, but I want to try to take a crack at it because I think it's important. So this is the 10-year anniversary of the Purge series, and for any of you unfamiliar with the Purge, I will give you a high level and then explain movie by movie and show by show, and then I want to tell you my thoughts and feelings about it and why I think it's a misunderstood series. So it starts like any emergency broadcast starts with the awful noise that you should, by the way, never ever play on YouTube or anywhere because the FCC will get you. Side note, I still don't understand how some people are able to play it and some aren't. But yeah, don't ever do that. Anyway, so just if you've ever had a tornado or any sort of emergency broadcast, but it says, this is not a test. This is your emergency broadcast system announcing the commencement of the annual purge sanctioned by the U.S. government. Weapons of Class 4 and lower have been authorized for use during the purge, although the weapons are restricted. Government officials of ranking 10 have been granted immunity from the purge and shall not be harmed. Commencement at the siren, any and all crime, including murder, will be legal for 12 continuous hours. Police, fire, and emergency medical services will be unavailable until tomorrow morning until 7 a.m. when the purge concludes. Blessed be our new founding fathers and America, a nation reborn. May God be with you all. And that's how the purge starts. It's a really simple premise. It starts at 7 p.m. and it ends at 7 a.m. I think it's in May or something. I forget exactly when it is. But every year at the same time, this political party called the New Founding Fathers figured out that they needed to do something about crime, allegedly, and to do that they needed some way of restricting it all to one night, kind of putting some rules around it. So basically, when they say weapons of Class 4 and lower, they're basically just meaning standard weapons. It basically means no explosives or anything more severe than that. And then when it says government officials of ranking 10, it's just talking about your elected officials. I don't think it ever really goes into detail, but it essentially means either elected officials or people who are running for office. And that's it. That's the purge in a nutshell. And I'm gonna kind of save my feelings on it until the end and kind of just go over the whole thing with you because it's kind of a lot. The series is a lot. So, starting with the first movie, 2013, simply called The Purge. A lot of this is like nuanced, but I'm gonna give you like my version of kind of like what's going on and why it's important. Because until you watch the whole thing, a lot of this, well, and depending if you watch it in the right order, is whether a lot of this is going to make sense or not. So, the 2013 Purge, and I'm going to show these in order of I'm going to talk about these in order that they actually released, not their proper order to watch them, and you can look that up online if you'd like. The first story is a very, very, very simple home invasion story. And this might put you off, or if you're the kind of person that loves home invasion stories, this may be right up your alley. The premise is the character that builds the home security systems that everybody decides that they need for the purge, because surviving this thing is a nightmare. You know, you think, oh, I can last 12 hours. But surely at some point in your life you've pissed somebody off, or a bunch of somebodies. Or maybe somebody's really pissed you off. And so everybody gets these full home security systems that are just bonkers. Anyway, it makes this guy crazy rich. Which of course pisses a bunch of people off. And it brings into account, like, imagine if you were trying to design like the perfect security system, and you were just making buco bucks, but you have the exact same security system as everybody else. And if you really think about it for a while, I don't know, like, again, I'll delve into my thoughts at the end, but it raises a lot of concerns over, like, would you want to build your own security system, or is it better to go with the pack? Not a lot is really introduced in this movie thematically, besides the fact that there's the haves, the have-nots, and everybody's talking about how it's their right to purge, and how they're going to clean themselves, and yada yada yada. And right off the bat, it seems like some kind of it's some kind of, I don't know, indictment of classism or racism or something, but in a lot of ways, you could also be making the allegory of religion, right? Going to church once a week, and all of a sudden you're cleansed. So there's lots of different ways you can theoretically, absorb this. But at the end of the movie, you still have some people that want to purge, and some people that don't want to purge, and a lot of people that don't want to be purged at all, and just want to be left alone. And everybody pragmatically seems to really be into guns. I don't think you hear a single person in any of the movies go, why do we need that? I think everybody knows. It's also a good time to say, like, this takes place in the future, but it was in the future of 2013, so it's all basically taking place now. Actually, maybe even a couple years ago. I can't exactly remember, but we'll get into that later. The next movie is called Purge Anarchy, which came out in 2014, just a year later, because, as you could imagine, or maybe not, the first movie made an insane amount of money. So the second movie was immediately greenlit, and they addressed a lot of the issues of the first movie, which is people wanted to actually see the dang purge and not a home invasion movie. So the second movie goes absolutely ham sandwiches with the purginess of it. And it's several years into the purge at this point, and there's an anti-purge resistance group that's starting to form, and you'll notice this becomes somewhat of a recurring theme. And as you get through the movie, the NNFA, the NFFA, the New Founding Fathers, you kind of realize that they're not the purge isn't really working for what it turns out that they really want to do, which is I should be making notes to remember all this, but I'm just going to try my best to remember. It's actually about depopulation, and it's about not having to pay as much, like, welfare services. We'll just use that as like an umbrella term. So the NFFA basically sends out their own kill squads in semi-trucks to strategically take out places that they need to, that are going to reduce the footprint of the parts of society that they don't want. And because the kill count's just flat out not high enough for their liking. And this also introduces the fact that the Richie Riches very much like to purge. However, they don't want to get their hands dirty, and so they send goon squads out to go grab people so they can purge in the little games they like to play. Usually like hunting, like you'd imagine the olden days. And everyone's got vendettas and doing this and that, and everybody's stabbing each other in the back because they've been basically holding up all their irritation at each other. Someone cheated on somebody, yada yada yada. They hold it up all year because for this one night they can act on it and deal with whoever is pissing them off. And the anti-purgers run around and try to even the odds, and you can decide which group you believe in if you like. The next movie, Purge Election Year, is released in 2016, and this is just so happens to be during a presidential election. If that sounds familiar, and if you look at that date and it sounds familiar, pretty interesting coincidental timing. The film's tagline was "Keep America Great," and a lot of the iconography of these posters were very very on the nose, but a lot of that, I would argue, well, I'll leave my opinions to the end. So as you can imagine, elected officials are going to want to run against the purge, right? And how would you keep an elected official safe during the purge? Well, it would be fine, because you can't take out a level 10 elected official, right? Well, this year the NFFA decides quite sneakily to just lift that. convenient plot device to go take out the official that's probably going to get elected, that's going to just vote the purge out. Because if she's elected, she could just do an emergency order and just get rid of the purge. So it also follows what I think is interesting people who have taken it into their own hands to try to be medics during the purge, because there's no ambulances, and so they basically have like volunteer medics and like volunteer underground hospitals. And so there's, it builds out more of the universe here. And it also kind of raises the question of like what happens, like what are the gangs doing during this time? What are it introduces the idea of what do they call them? Like purge tourists. People who come over, like, because the purge is only in the United States, and so people come visit and they get their purge passports, and they all run around and purge Americans. So it introduces that idea. It introduces more like paramilitary teams into the mix. And so, again, very, very on the nose. It's like some Nazi merc group. Some like neo-SS merc group is running around. Again, I get it's like it's very on the nose. Whatever. Again, my thoughts will be at the end. And I'm trying to just gather my thoughts here. There's a group that's not quite a counter-purge group, but a group that is just like flat out trying to take out the NFFA at this point. And that all comes to a head at the end of the movie. And I don't know if I should spoil the whole thing or not. Maybe you'll want to see it. Okay, never mind. I'm just gonna spoil it. So the senator running for president gets elected by a landslide because she wins Florida. Again, very, very, very on the nose. But whatever. It's fine. She wins Florida and gets way more than the electoral votes that she needs, and she immediately gets rid of the purge. And so you think, everything's fine. And you might want to know what happens after that, but too bad, because we're going back in time. What is known as the movie is called The First Purge, which released in 2018, goes way back in time to the very, very, very first purge. And it's not even really the first purge. It's kind of like a demo purge to see if it was even going to work. To see if they could even do it. So they do it on Staten Island. And they basically just kind of like lock off Staten Island for the night and see if anything happens. And they weren't even sure if anything was going to happen. And so, again, very, very on the nose here. They let psychos out of the asylum. And then they also have people basically wear cameras. And then if they participate, they get rich just for participating in this very first purge. And it kind of goes like a little too well. They kind of overdo it, and because they weren't sure. And people try to fight against it, and they say, this is horrible, this is disgusting. But there's just, absolute psychos running everywhere. and folks try to stop it. They try to leak information and stuff, and this is kind of like one of the first glimpses where you realize how powerful the NFFA really is, because they don't really talk about how powerful the NFFA is until way later. Like, how do they enforce what weapons everybody uses? Like, what stops people from just flying around in helicopter gunships, which the mercs do, but if they're on the take, or if the NFFA can't stop them, then by issuing, like, basically launching the military, if anyone breaks the purge rules, pretty crazy. So there's a lot more gang stuff here, and if I understand right, this was the most successful of the series. And I think this is either the first or the second one I saw, and I was it's interesting. And again, deals with overpopulation, deals with wanting to wipe out disenfranchised people, or just people that are perceived as a drain. And then 3 years, well, in between the First Purge and the Forever Purge, which I'll get to in a second, is a 2-part series, a 2-season series. And I'll cover those right here in just a few minutes after the Forever Purge. So, Forever Purge, which came out in 2021, is essentially the gal that became president that got rid of the purge. The purge wasn't gone for very long, and the NFFA managed to get reelected, and they managed to reinstate the purge, and everything got worse. And they really subtly hint in the prior movies as to the anti-purgers. They really subtly hint that, like, the purge may be having adverse effects besides the fact of everybody getting wholesale slaughtered. There may be other effects that they're not realizing. And so if you watch the 2 seasons of the Purge before the Forever Purge, it won't be such like a gigantic contrast as to all of a sudden how it gets this bad, because the Forever Purge in universe takes place quite a bit later, and it, instead of taking place in a really urban or suburban area, which the rest of the movies are all in urban and suburban areas, this one takes place in the middle of nowhere in Texas. Oh, super on the nose again. Guess what there is? A giant border wall. Big shock, right? The only... I'll get into it later, don't worry. So, the Purge has gone from wiping out disenfranchised people or people that are drained on the system to essentially just wiping out all immigrants, or depending on how far you are through the movie, just wiping everyone out who is not ethnically of their group. And they handle this well ish, but I'll go into it later, I promise. So they kind of trick everybody. They pull a fast one, and nobody realizes it. The Purge is horrible. Everybody, for the most part, everybody survives. And the sirens, brrrr, brrrr. Everybody tries to go back to work. There's just one problem. You know, all the sanitations crew, you know, come up and everyone and all the cops, you know, start to assess what happened. Only one problem. The purgers just don't stop. They don't stop purging. And they just keep killing throughout the whole day. And it doesn't stop. And they can't stop everybody from purging. And it turns out that everybody across the US just like keeps purging and doesn't stop. And everyone's like, oh, what's wrong? What's wrong with everybody? And they declare martial law. The military just immediately gets overran. And Canada and Mexico open up their borders. And they're like, okay, well, you've got 6 hours to get down here. You know, if you're close enough. Or Canada's like, you got 6 hours to get up here if you're close enough. And then we're closing the borders. Because these border walls are massive, huge, indestructible border walls. You might even say they were like huge, the best border walls ever made, you might say. So everybody who can tries to get down to the border. Big problem. All the purgers are down there waiting for them, and the whole thing turns into a bloodbath, and they have to close the borders down to where essentially nobody can get across. And a couple people do, and la-di-da, they gotta kill the bad guys, and everything turns out as okay as it could be. But the problem is, like, at this point, the US is like a wasteland from this purge that just doesn't stop. And then that's essentially the end of the movie. And they basically said, we're not opening the borders again until the US sorts its shit out. And that's it. There was supposed to be a 6th purge. Not sure. There's not a lot of info on why it didn't come out. But it would have been a world purge. Because 2049, I think, is when Forever Purge was supposed to happen, and so 2059 would have been like the world purge. So, for some reason, it didn't come out. Hopefully, it'll come out someday. So we'll go to the TV series really quick, of which there's 2 seasons. The first season, in a lot of ways, is like Purge Anarchy, where it's kind of like, I don't know what, 8 episodes? No, 10 episodes of just kind of what the Purge is like. And, but it's very, very, very entertaining. It takes place in 2036. For however good that does. I still haven't seen like a complete breakdown of like when every single one happens year-wise, but apparently the first season is 2027. The second season is 2036 and 2037. So the first season doesn't have like a lot of really, really ultra memorable concepts to it, except there is a character that's tracking people using those like that spray that the satellites can detect, which is just insane because I wasn't aware that that technology had even been disclosed at the time, that they had like a little spritzer you could spray on someone to track them with satellites. That was crazy. And also there's a what I think is interesting death cult where there was guys and gals in robes, and their whole idea is to just go walk out into the purge and just get destroyed, because their idea was they thought they were helping everybody, quote unquote, cleanse themselves by kind of being extra purge fodder. And there's some weird, game show stuff and this and that, purge game shows and things, but kind of like a carnival. It's kind of a forgettable season, but you also have a lot of badasses in it that are just, freaking badass. Yeah. And in one of the earlier movies, I'm already forgetting which one it was because I kind of binged them all. I didn't take really good notes. I think it's at the end of Anarchy, where the guy says, the purge isn't supposed to be about heroes. You're not supposed to be saving lives. You're supposed to be taking lives. And so a lot of the purge movies really are like almost everybody dying. And I think that gives like the heroes even more. Not only does it make the stakes really, 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 really high, but it makes the heroes even more awesome. So I don't have a ton to say about season 1. So you might ask yourself, all this purge violence, well, what can really go from here, And there's like motivational tapes, and there's a lot of radio, and there's a lot of, podcasts, in universe. There's like a purge app of like how much people want to purge you, so you can look up your name and see how many people want to purge you. There's like the dark web where you can put hits out on people. Is this massive, 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 massive universe. And then season 2 of The Purge drops. And I took forever to see it. And I'll get to why in a little bit. But Purge 2 takes the whole thing and just blows it wide open. And it goes over like the Purge mask merch. And like it goes into like every single thing that happens in between purge nights. And you might think that is like the lamest, stupid, boring crap. But a couple things. You get to see 2 purges in it instead of 1, so that's cool. Instead of it just being like one long purge night of trying to follow 50 characters and getting confused, they split it into 2, which works really well. But in between the purge nights, the other 364 days, you get to see all the NFFA's BS and all a huge chunk of that season follows the people that work in the NFFA command centers that just follow purgers around through the CCTV cameras and make sure that people are only using the weapons that they're supposed to, and they make sure that they stop the purge. They stop purging when they're supposed to. And you realize, oh, that's the whole point of the sirens, is people hear the sirens and they're supposed to stop. You see them doing that in some of the movies, but you don't really know why. Well, it's because the NFFA is always watching you. Well, and again, heavy spoilers. The NFFA is harboring several bad secrets. The first of which, and if you watch this before you watch the final purge, you find out the revelation that the purge is indeed making more people like more psychotic. It's like causing psychotic breaks in people that wouldn't have otherwise had like a traumatic event, not like PTSD, but it's like turning them into lunatics. Like it's turning tons of people into homicidal maniacs. But it's turning other people really, really, really good as well as they rise to the occasion. But the NFFA is covering their tracks by killing people outside of the purge window, and they get caught. Because people inside the NFFA who watch the footage realize that it happened, and they kind of start working from the inside out and outside in and figure everything out. They also realize that, or maybe not realize, but they hadn't really explained before, but there's really no point of like court anymore or jail anymore, because they just hold people up to the next purge and then use them in those hunting games and just have the Richie Riches kill them all. So they single-handedly, fixed tons and tons and tons of problems with this. And there's a famous quote, and I'm going to mess it up. I can't remember if it was in the season or towards the end. Or it could have been I think it was an election year, yeah, where he's like, there's the haves and the have-nots, and like the have-nots like want too much to where they like there isn't going to be enough for like how much all of them want. And I'll give my thoughts on that later, but that's kind of like they can't keep these like homicidal maniacs buttoned down, but they're burying it because they don't want to give the anti-purgers more ammo to get them shut down. But they can't keep the lid on it much longer, and the info gets out that they're killing people outside of purge. And it kind of just spurs on the anti-NFFA movement, which I assume is supposed to segue. Yeah, it's supposed to segue into election year, if you watch the whole thing. And then at the end, the security designer, back from the first movie, has a little cameo where he's like, don't worry, the security systems will be fine. But if you watch them out of order, that doesn't make any sense. But if you watch them in order, then you're like, I get it. So, that's kind of my synopsis. And I tried to keep a lot of opinions of this to myself, but so this will be the opinion portion. And first I'll explain kind of my life with this, which is in 2013 when The Purge came out, the first movie, not The First Purge, which I know is confusing. It was in a time in our lives where everything still seemed like it was going to be okay, potentially, and that things weren't going to get that bad that fast. That being said, it should have been somewhat obvious, because the whole Trayvon Martin thing happened in early February of 2012. And this came out June 7th, 2013. Now, this is all speculation on my part, But in all fairness, there had been massive riots and civil unrest before Don't Shoot and BLM ever, and Antifa, and I don't even know, there's a million groups now. I don't even want to say all their names. It doesn't matter. All the way back to 1999, like 2000, when the anarchists took over Seattle for the WTO, which is why I grew up realizing, oh, this is a thing that can happen. Surprise. So I'm not going to say that these movies had anything to do with the Zimmerman trial, because there was a lot of indications for a really long time that something like this could happen. I just don't think anyone thought it was going to get that bad that fast. So I haven't seen any behind the scenes or anything, but of why they decided to make this when they did. But when I saw the trailer for it, I thought it was like an absolutely disgusting abomination. And that was like the last tiny pieces of shreds of my idealism that I had left. You know, I had already dealt with so many other movies that I felt like were heralding like the end of society as we know it. Because I knew like the worse that movies were going mainstream, the worse of the content of what was going mainstream, like the more our society was degenerating. And I felt like Purge was like the end. I'm like, if this movie can come out, this is the end of society. We just don't know it yet. If this topic, if this theory can go mainstream. And I'm like, oh, never mind. It's just a stupid home invasion movie. What's the big deal? I'm like, never mind. I don't even want to watch it. It's just a stupid home invasion thing. It doesn't have any legs. Never mind. And then Purge Anarchy came out. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, nope. I was right. And the movie did humongous. And then it wasn't long after that, between 2014 and 2016, that this whole new generation of protesters came on board. You know, when you have Baltimore and Seattle and Portland and, you know, Berkeley and more, just one after another. And we went from the first purge to almost damn near like the last purge in a very short few years. It happened so fast. And I think part of the problem was it was censored on the news so much that nobody even knew how bad it was getting. And a lot of the stuff in real life makes the stuff on the Purge look like nothing now. And I almost think that's why it's hard to come up with another Purge. Just like it'd be hard to make another Scream movie or another, maybe not so much Saw, because people aren't that bad most of the time. But I joke about these idiots that say, you know, we need a new nitty gritty Ninja Turtles. I'm like, you don't understand. We see worse stuff than that on the news every night. We see worse stuff than the Purge every night, or Scream. Like, not Saw, but you get the point. Saw is more like, you know, a trap, kind of a puzzle thing that they used to really upset me that had become a thing. But then later on, I'm like, oh, this whole trap puzzle thing makes sense. I get it. I'm not going to watch it, but I get it. But this Purge thing, like, you don't know what it's like to know that 100 or 200 or 300 or 400 people are potentially marching down your street. And there's almost nothing you can do about it. And to make matters worse, you'll have to deal with the fallout the next day because all of a sudden law enforcement magically turns back on. It was like that for a good third of a year, where you had no idea, where you're sitting there glued to your monitor until 2 a.m, hoping that these idiots don't march down your street. All the while, they sit online and complain that they're the ones being attacked. And they have been doing this for 6-7+ years. They swear up and down they're the ones being attacked. They swear up and down they're the ones that have to defend themselves, when they are 100% the ones causing it. So, I think the Purge, the narrative of the Purge reminds me a lot about Starship Troopers. I think is the closest. Where everybody says that Starship Troopers is the fascists, dream or whatever. When really it's anything but, right? It's a damning indictment of why you don't have a purely militaristic society. Much like there's movies where you don't want a purely scientific society. And so a lot of people say that, oh, the Purge is just like a leftist utopia, or they don't even say it's a leftist utopia. They say, it's just a leftist talking point saying, what conservatives would do if they ran the country. But that's why it's more like Starship Troopers than anything. That's not what would happen if conservatives ran the country. That's what liberals think conservatives would do, because they're projecting themselves. And there's several times in the Purge where they address this. And one of the last most poignant times is in the Forever Purge at the end, where the Mexican guy is talking to the white guy and he's like, you really don't like me, you really don't like me. It's like, I don't have a problem with you. I just think we should all stick with our own kind. He's like, I don't hate you at all. I have nothing against you. I just think we should all be staying with our own kind. And the Mexican turns and he looks at him and he's like, yeah, you know what? I think I agree with you. But here's the problem. We're together now. And it was one of those awesome points. And he's like, yep, we're together now. And they end up carrying each other basically through the entire movie, and it's really cool. And so you could say that the left is trying to say that conservatives would be the NFFA, but really what they're saying is that no matter what happens, we all have to stick together. And that's not a leftist talking point, that we all need to stick together and we'll all get through this, and that we all need to get armed and train and become protectors of our communities. That's not a leftist talking point either. So it doesn't hold up. So where what in there would be a leftist talking point that the NFFA has like massive surveillance. Well, like, that's already a problem. That has nothing to do with the left or the right, and they get caught spying internally all the time too. The whole government does. So that's not a leftist talking point. So what is it, that the wealthy elites are in control of everything? Well, those are not conservatives that are the wealthy elites in control of everything. That's stupid. There's a whole cabal that's in charge that is apolitical. Some would call them, anti-human, like, because they're the way they treat humanity. So there will be like little winks and nudges, like the fact that Mexico has a ludicrously gigantic border wall. But I see more winks and nods and side eyes and elbow pokes in to this BS in just normal movies now. I mean, all the, there's no like snarky snide ass comments about like rich white people in these movies. In the Purge movies. I hear more shit about that from left-leaning people in real life complaining about rich white people. And so if they were going to have their little friggin' dog whistles in the Purge, they would have been doing that, but there's not. In fact, it seems to like avoid every single racist and anti-racist pandering trope that's in like every other single woke movie. I'm not saying this is an anti-woke movie, because it's not. But when it pans over the Richie Riches, there's other ethnicities there. When it pans over the people who are getting screwed, there's like multiple ethnicities there. They introduce racism quite a bit, but it makes sense within the context of the movie. Also, when the minorities go to hide, they tend to like hide in their own camps or their own bases with their own ethnicities or their own family units. Like, if anything, strangely enough, it's just that all the way from the very, 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 very first movie, even though they kind of did make it look like there was a bunch of white people chasing around a black guy at the beginning, they never say a single thing about his race at all. Everything they talk about in the first movie is all about class. The guy says, we don't want to kill our own kind. He's not talking about white people. He's from like a preppy school. He's talking about other rich people. And it's the same thing in the second season of The Purge. Like, they're all in preppy colleges. The psychopaths are just like murdering whoever they can. Everybody has like their own motivations, both for sticking together and for dividing. And I think that makes it like more organic. I don't know. It makes the whole thing seem more authentic. And since I've been around riots and protests now for years and years and years and years and years, and that's literally what my book series is about, I'll tell you that everything that happens in the Purge is pretty much how it actually happens in real life. People band together and they survive together. And if there's a destructive element it typically cannibalizes itself. And people who get powerful abuse their power. Like, that's it. And its roots. Like, yeah, sure, there's racist undertones and there's power hungry almost said like corporate identities, but that's almost the one thing that it doesn't have. You have like mega power hungry politicians. There's a religious element, but it's not huge. A lot of it's culture, and a lot of it's like power based, politically, and power and elite based, and then culture based. And then it's pretty much all the poor people or disenfranchised people trying to survive. And if the story was missing anything at all, like if this was going to be like a real Lefty Lou movie, you would have had either like an evil corporation, or you would have had like an evil corporation merging with the government to create some kind of like corptocracy, which is what I always talk about. And to be perfectly honest, if they had some evil corporation that was merging with the government, that would even be more accurate to what's going on now. That doesn't happen. There are no... the most evil corporation there seems to be through the whole thing is this hilarious kind of almost a throwaway segment where they're in this boardroom talking about what masks to sell the next year. It's a hilarious little kind of like throwaway thing, but it's like, well, yeah, I guess that makes sense. And then all the different weapons, people selling weapons. It's almost more of like anarcho-capitalism versus there's no meritocracy at all. It's just anarcho-capitalism versus elites. And none of that's like leftist talking points to me. I suggest seeing it. I don't blame you if you want to skip the first one, because the home invasion thing, you've seen it a billion times. But it's kind of fun if you think about it like a side story of like, I want to meet the guy that made all the security systems that I see in all the other movies, because his security system is extremely iconic. It's in the beginning of every single purge, because everyone's got to shut their doors. So I'm going to kind of leave it there. I think I covered everything I wanted to cover. I didn't take any notes, but I think that was pretty concise. So I'll throw the little purge outro in here so you can hear it. I didn't want to like do it at the beginning and blow everybody's eardrums out. And I'll intersperse some of like my favorite masks, because some of the movie posters are just iconic. Anyway, I appreciate you all. This has been my Purge 10-year anniversary retrospective, and the series means a lot to me. Between Purge and Tom Clancy and Resident Evil, those are like my three big motivators for my books. So I guess if you like The Purge, check out my books. Or if you like Tom Clancy, or if you like Resident Evil, check out my books. And I appreciate y'all, and I'll talk to y'all later. Brrrr. Brrrr.
This is not a test. This is your emergency broadcast system announcing the commencement of the annual purge, sanctioned by the U.S. government.
Commencing at the siren, any and all crime, including murder, will be legal for 12 continuous hours. Police, fire, and emergency medical services will be unavailable until tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. when the purge concludes.
And, for the first time since its inception, no one has been granted special immunity from the purge. No citizen or group will be exempt. Blessed be our new founding fathers and America, a nation reborn. May God be with you all.